Who's to know what happens when the world ends? At least this is an okay bar.
Hi besties! How are we doing? Sorry, don't mind me taking my AirPods out. I have just been listening to A Court of Silver Flames and just hit a really juicy bit. I have yet to read A Court of Silver Flames, even though I've read the rest of the ACOTAR series and I really loved it. For some reason I just didn't get around to reading A Court of Silver Flames, and that's a crime because I am a Nesta fangirl. I stan Nesta. I've liked Nesta from day one, so I'm really enjoying it. Anyway, that's literally got nothing to do with this video because that's about my February reading, but this is a little wrap up of all of the books I read in January. I had such a good reading month in January. I read 9 books, which is pretty good for me. I would say that's like on the upper end of how many books I can usually read in a month. All fiction, no non-fictions. I'm just not a non-fiction girly. What can I say? It's not for me. I've tried and I like stories. I found a 5-star and I found 4 4-star books. So the majority of my reading was 4 and 5-star books. It was such a good reading month and it's put me in the best mood for reading this year, which I really am excited about because I just want to have a really good reading year. I want to read everything at the minute. I want to pick up all the books. Let's unpack what I read in January, what I thought about it. No more rambling, let's get to it. Let's get down to business. Starting with, also if you see me looking down, it's because I have my little reading journal down here which has all of my reading notes in it, so I will be referring to this a little bit. Okay, so the first book I read in January was Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellors. This was one of 2 books that we read for my book club, Books of Brooke. It will be linked down below if you want to join. So we read Cleopatra and Frankenstein, which follows Cleo and Frank, nicknamed Cleopatra and Frankenstein, who meet in New York and then very swiftly get married. Despite them having quite a big age gap, they decide to get married, and the book basically follows the fallout of that decision and the repercussions and the reverberations of that marriage, not just for the couple but for all of the people around them, their friends, their family, their colleagues. So it's a literary fiction, but it has elements of romance to it. I would say in that sense it really reminded me of a Sally Rooney book where it kind of has that blend between literary fiction and romance. I think if that's something you like, if you like the kind of Sally Rooney-esque books with the 20-something-year-old woman who get in relationships with older men and are a bit delulu and chaotic, then I think you'd probably really like Cleo and Frank. I really enjoyed the book departing from the couple and branching out into all the people around them. I thought that was really interesting. I know some people kind of wanted it to focus more on the relationship, but I personally really enjoyed that we got to see like Cleo's best friend and Frank's sister. I really enjoyed all of their stories. I think this book was at its best when it was just very mundane. I really enjoy books that don't have much plot. I like when you're just seeing day-to-day things happen. Sometimes this book veered into the more like melodramatic and these kind of like heightened plotty moments. Those bits lost me a little bit. I didn't find them as engaging. I didn't find them as rich and detailed. I feel like they were kind of just trying to drive the story to a point of drama for like reader interest. Mellors is just such a good writer of character. Every character felt really vivid and vital, and I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I absolutely loved it. The next book that I read in January was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. So this is what I would say is a literary fiction with elements of magical realism and fantasy. It's definitely not a fantasy action-packed book, and I think that's where a lot of people get disappointed with it, and it's certainly where I got disappointed with it the first time I tried reading it. So I was excited to pick it back up again with book club because it gave me a push to finally get around to giving this a second chance. The first time I read this I was a lot younger. I might have been like 14 or 15, and I don't think it would have really matched my taste then as a reader, but now this is so up my street in terms of like my personal reading taste as a 23-year-old reader. So this book centers around a magical circus which will just sort of pop up out of nowhere in different places all over the world. It's really enchanting and mystical, and it becomes the sort of playing ground for this magical competition. And this is where I think people expect it to be this like high stakes, action-packed fantasy novel with like this magical duel. It's really not like that, and I think the back cover is kind of misleading in that sense. This is much more of a slow burn magical exhibition, I suppose, and I think that's better to go into it with that expectation that this is two young people locked in a magical competition who have to show off their skills over the course of time, like in the playing ground of the circus. I think if you go into it expecting that, you'll enjoy it a lot more rather than going into it expecting like some high stakes battle. This is one of the most magical feeling books I have read like ever. It made me feel so enraptured in the story and the setting. I just wanted to go to the circus, explore it. It felt so magical while I was reading it. The same feeling you get when you're younger and you read a fantasy book as a child and you just feel like a whole world of possibilities has been opened up. That's how I felt reading this book. I ended up listening to a lot of this on audiobook, and I would really highly recommend the audiobook. It's narrated by this really sweet old man, or at least he sounds like an old man, and it just feels really cozy, like your granddad's telling you a story. I just found that a really lovely reading experience, so would highly recommend. I gave this 4 stars. I then read The Fine Print by Lauren Asher. This is book 1 in the Dreamland Billionaires series, so it's Lauren Asher's billionaire romance series. It basically follows these 3 brothers who are all set to inherit this Disneyland media empire, or Disneyland inspired. It's called Dreamland. And to receive their inheritance, their granddad has set out these terms for each of them, these things they have to do and fulfill. So in the first book, we're following Rowan, and Rowan has to improve an element of the park. He has to go and like work on this development project, and he ends up meeting Zara, who at the time is one of the... She works in like the princess palace thing where they do like the makeup and the hair on the people and the children. So she works there, but like they end up working together. I'm really butchering this description because I don't want to tell you too much, but they end up meeting and working together, and then obviously the romance goes from there. I found the setting of this novel really intriguing. I liked the kind of amusement park, Disneyland magic of it. I also really appreciated the representation in this book. There was really good queer and disability rep. Unfortunately, I just wasn't the biggest fan of Zara and Rowan as a couple. I didn't really buy into their chemistry, and without saying anything too spoilery, I wasn't a fan of how they got to know each other and ended up together. It made me feel quite uncomfortable, and this also made me think maybe billionaire romances just aren't for me either, because the kind of morally dubious behaviour of Rowan and also his other brothers later on in the books just really made me uncomfortable. I couldn't find them romantically interesting because they just underpaid their workers and treated their workers poorly, and I was like, ew, that's just icky. No, like, pay your workers, what the heck's that about? I ended up giving this book 3 stars, and I then went on to read the second book in the series, Terms and Conditions. This I found mildly better than the first book. This book followed Declan. Declan's terms to receive his inheritance were so much worse than the first brother Rowan's. He had to get married and have an heir. Like, this man had to get a whole ass wife and child to receive his inheritance, and the other guy had to do a project. Like, that's like not comparable at all. Declan has to find a wife, so he sends off his assistant Iris to find a woman for him, and then she last minute drops out of the wedding, and so Iris steps in and says she will marry Declan. They did a bit of travelling in this book, so there was some new settings brought into it which made it a little bit more interesting. I also preferred the steamy smutty scenes in this book. I found they were a little bit more creative, and I felt like the chemistry between the 2 main characters was a bit more believable because they'd known each other working together for longer, so I kind of bought into the chemistry and the spark between them more than I did in the first book. Once again, I was a fan of the representation in this book. The main character had dyslexia and there was BIPOC characters. I was just struggling a little bit with the main male characters being kind of mean and not very nice. I feel like I've read mafia romances, like I will excuse a man literally killing someone, but if a man is really mean to a woman in the book, or if, like, for example, in this book, he kind of blocks her career opportunities, then I was like, ooh, no, I don't like it. So I was kind of off put by that, and I kind of struggled to get past that. I also realised with this book that there was a pattern between Throttled by Lauren Asher, which I tried reading, I didn't really like, and then the first and the second book in this series. I don't like the way Lauren Asher ends her books very much. I found the third act conflict in all three of the books I've read by her to be really underwhelming, and it kind of drags, and I felt like I was like forcing myself through reading it. I ended up giving this one 3 stars as well. I don't know if I'm gonna carry on with the rest of the series, honestly. I don't see myself reading the third book. I might do just like finish the series because that's satisfying, but I won't be rushing to read it anytime soon. Next up, I read Here With Me by Brooke Montgomery, and I loved this book. So this is a cowboy romance book. It follows Noah and Fisher? Yeah, Fisher. It follows Noah and Fisher, and they have a 20+ year age gap, which, can I just say, would never have been my thing. Like, I never anticipated enjoying a book with an age gap of more than 20 years, but hear me out. Either a rodeo, there's an immediate spark, they end up sharing a one-night stand. In the morning, Noah realizes, oh my god, that's my ex's dad. I have never read an ex's dad romance before. I don't think I ever will again. It's really not my thing, but this book, Brooke Montgomery put something in the pages of this book. She laced it with crack. I was like, oh my god, so good. Honestly, the star of this book was Noah, the female main character. She was an icon. I loved her. I loved that she was good at her job. She was passionate about what she did. She was level-headed. She was communicative. She was caring. She was family-oriented. I mean, like, truly, what a girly. I wanted to be her best friend. And speaking of best friends, I wanted to be best friends with her best friend, Magnolia. What an iconic duo. I'm so excited to read the second book in the series that follows Magnolia, because she was great, and she wants to open some kind of like drinks stand, drinks cart, coffee cart. That's so cute. I think Brooke Montgomery did a really, really good job of striking a balance between open door and closed door sex scenes. This book was sexy and it was brilliant and spicy, but there wasn't too much of anything. There was a good cut-off point where she closed the door, and I just loved that. I thought it was great. I thought the sex scenes were really inventive and really creative. I think Brooke Montgomery is now an author by author for me. I will be reading everything she puts out. I am a fan. I gave this book 4 stars. Next up, quite the fall from grace, I read Bound by Honor by Cora Reilly. This is a mafia romance novel, and it follows Luca and Aria. Aria is like a mafia princess, Luca is like a mafia heir, and they are basically arranged into a marriage so that it will create less tension between 2 mafia warring families. I kind of immediately got the ick with this book because they meet when Aria is only 16 or 15 and Luca is an adult, and that just really icked me out. Even though nothing untoward happened between them while she was underage, I just don't like that they met when she was that age. It felt really icky and gross, and a lot of the like male behavior towards her was disgusting. I know some of this comes with the territory of mafia romances, but I really don't know why authors feel the need to make these girls underage. She could have literally been 18 when they met, young still, absolutely scared because she's getting married so young, and then have them get married at like 23 and 28, and I would have been like, slay, love that, that's great, that sounds so fun. It also would have made their like arc of their relationship more interesting because they would have been able to communicate more in their 20s. You're a better communicator. And it also would have made the whole arc around Luca and his involvement in the mafia so much more believable. I could literally rant about this all day. Can we just age the characters up, please? There's literally no reason to have them meet when she's like a child. It's gross. There was nothing really that wrong with this book. I didn't really like the writing. I didn't think the writing was particularly good. The main crime it committed was just being a bit dull. It was very much every single mafia romance book ever. Like, it was very generic. It had all the same tropes. I didn't really feel the chemistry between Luca and Arya. I think there are a lot better mafia romances out there. I would highly recommend Sophie Lark's mafia romance books. I think they're a little bit more vanilla in terms of the mafia side of things. They're quite gentle, but when I just read a man drink his own blood, I will take vanilla. I will take vanilla, because that was disgusting. I was like, no. This book was not for me. I gave it a 2 stars. I then read Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonam-Young, which, can I just say, has been like so hyped up to me. So many people were recommending this book, said they loved it. And at the beginning of this book, I was totally obsessed. I thought the beginning was so cute and just amazing. This book follows Win and Beau. They meet at a Halloween party, they hit it off, and they end up having a one-night stand, and things really go crazy and change from there, and they are launched into something they really didn't expect. I don't want to tell you what it is, I don't want to say too much. I think you should go into this book with not much understanding of what happens in the plot, because I think that will make it a lot more fun for you. The main thing I loved about this book, aside from the disability rep, which was amazing, was the communication. These 2 people communicated the shit out of this relationship. They spoke, they listened, they set boundaries, they respected boundaries. I absolutely loved that this modelled such healthy relationship practices. I'm also a huge fan of the pet name Honey, and I thought that was so cute in this book. Unfortunately, I found this book to be quite sweet and maybe didn't quite offer me enough. It's gonna be a really unpopular opinion, because I think people love this book and I really liked it, but something about it was lacking, and so I ended up giving it 3 stars. And I don't know if maybe partially that might be to do with the mood I was in while I was reading it. Maybe I just wasn't in the mood to read it, but something about it didn't quite hit the spot, and so I gave it 3 stars. I then read a art copy of Swift and Saddled by Lyla Sage. First of all, thank you so much for my art copy of this book, because I was so excited for this book. I read Done and Dusted last year. I loved it. It was one of my favourite romance books of the year. And so to receive an arc of the 2nd book, I was so excited, and it did not disappoint. This has solidified Lyla Sage as an author-by-author for me personally. This book followed Wes and Ada. They meet in a dive bar and they end up sharing a very passionate kiss. And they're both kind of gutted to never see each other again. They're like, oh, shame we didn't swap numbers. And then the next day they meet up, because they don't know that Wes is Ada's boss, that Wes has hired Ada as the interior designer for his new project on his ranch. No, I'm gagged. I'm actually gagged. That's so good. This book was just amazing from the get-go. From the first page, I was like, I'm in, sign me up. I love it. I love that Ada was really good at her job as an interior designer. I like that we got to see so many elements of interior design within this book, and I loved how caring and sweet Wes was. Each of the characters had their own sort of backstories that brought a lot of depth and meaning to this book, which I really, really enjoyed. It was a lot deeper than your casual surface level, you know, romance book. Similarly to Hannah Bonam-Young's book, this book modelled really good consent and communication and respect of boundaries. I really loved that. There's a scene in this book, not a spoiler, where Wes's dog runs up to Ada and is like really obsessed with her, and Wes is like, he's got a thing for beautiful women. And I was like, that's not, no, because that's a line. I know it's a line. And I'm gay, like I don't, but like that's so cute. That's such a cute little line. I love it, I love it, I love it, I love it. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. It was so good. I'm so excited to read the next book in the series. Finally, the book that I spent most of January reading. I started reading it on the 8th of January and I literally finished it like 2 days ago on like the 29th. And that book is The Priory. Oh, I've got it here. The Priory of the Orange Tree. I mean, you can see why it took me a month to read it, because she's chunky, she's 800 pages. And I did read all of these books in between. I kind of read this one alongside reading lots of other different books. Oh my God, guys, this book. This is my 5-star read of the month. This is a high fantasy novel. I don't even know how to begin describing what this book is, because it's so vast and so epic. of a tale that I can't like wrap it up, I can't sum it up. It's amazing. What does the back say? Okay, the back just says, a world divided, a queendom without an heir, an ancient enemy awakens. That's a great description of this. Well done, whoever wrote that, because I couldn't summarize this. This book has dragons in it as well. I didn't know that until I went into it, which is really dumb because it has a dragon on the cover. I just didn't really take in the fact that that was a dragon. Loads of dragons. I'm in awe of this book and the writing. I don't know how Samantha Shannon wrote this book. I don't know how one person's brain produced this, but I am so impressed, like so impressed. One of the best fantasy novels I've ever read. And the best bit about it, so much sapphic love at the centre of it. And I was lapping it up. I think it's amazing. If you're looking for a queer fantasy, this is the shit. So much queer love in this book, and it's done beautifully. There are so many lines in this book. I had to go and buy my own copy. I was reading a library copy, but I had to go and buy my own copy so I could highlight it, because there were so many lines in this book that I want to come back to and just absorb again. They're so beautiful. This book is also great if you're somebody who doesn't like battle scenes and war in your fantasy books, because this does have a war element to it, but there aren't stupid battle scenes that you can't follow along with. They're like written really, really well, and they're really short and they don't happen often, and like it's just so good. This is a fantasy book for the girlies and the gays, and I think you should all read it because I think it's truly one of the best books I've read in a long time. I'm so excited to read the second book in the series. This is a big fat 5 stars from me. So that was my January reading. Awesome, right? Pretty good, pretty amazing, pretty happy with the fact that I literally loved basically all of the books I read in the month. I mean, we love that. Top of the TBR for next month is going to be A Court of Silver Flames, which I'm currently reading. I would love to get through that. I would also like to try and do a reread of House of Earth and Blood, the first Crescent City book. I've read it, I loved it, but I read it a while ago and I really want to continue the series. So I think I'm going to do a reread of that at some point in the month, hopefully. I'll also be reading 2 books for book club, Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Blake, which I'm really, really excited about. It's a romance story and I think it's gonna be so cute. And then The Satsuma Complex by Bob Mortimer, which is very much out of my comfort zone, but I'm intrigued to see how I feel about it. I also have 2 arcs I need to get round to. I have Wandering Stars and Mongrels, so I'm gonna try and read those in February too. And then my optimistic other book that I want to try and get to is Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. I may have to reread the first book in that series. What's it called? I might have to reread Ninth House before I read it, because I can't quite remember everything that happens in Ninth House. But we will see. I want to try and get around to Hellbent because I'm really excited to read that soon. So that was my January reading. Thank you, besties, for sitting with me and chatting about my January reading. Let me know down below the highs and the lows of your January reading. I would love to know what you've been reading, how you feel about it. Let me know the top TBR for February too, because I want to know what all of us girlies are reading next month. Like, what are we going to be reading? I need to know. If you want to see more of me elsewhere, then you can head over to my Instagram, my Goodreads, all of that is linked down below. If not, I'll see you in my next video very, very soon. Bye, besties.